This was also after your hip replacement, but you brought your hip with you. He brought his hip bone with him because he felt like he had to have it intact. And he said he didn't want to leave it at the top of the mountain because he said it would be littering, and he really wanted all of his grandkids to bring it to show and tell. This is my grandpa's hip that went with him to the top of Everest and Denali, and that is so funny.
The funny part was, and his name's Dr. Krager, the surgeon here in town. When he told me that I needed the hip replaced, it was before I went to Denali, and your mother was with me, and I said I'd do it on two. If you give me two things, I said one is I want it done quickly because I want to try to climb, and he already told me that I'd be climbing in 2 months if you let me replace it, and I said okay, I want it done quickly because I want to be climbing in 2 months, and then he said, what's your other one? I said, I want my hip bone back. And he said, I've done 3,000 surgeries. I've never had anybody ask for their hip bone back.
Oh, my gosh.
I told him the story. I said, it's carried me up 6 of the 7 summits, and I want to carry it up the 7th.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Living Fully podcast. This is probably my most requested guest to come back that I have on the podcast for you guys today, besides Kyle, and that is my dad, Gary Ervin. So why today's episode is one of my very favorite episodes is because we talk about my dad completing the 7 summits. So we talk a little bit about what the 7 summits are, but it is the highest point on each continent. So, at this point, he has done Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, Aconcagua, Mount Everest, Mount Vincent, Carson's Pyramid, and Denali. And if you guys listened to a couple of the episodes that we did early on the early seasons of the podcast, he talks about how he started writing these lessons to his grandkids as he started his soiree into alpine mountaineering. And, this is something that my dad started later in life. He was in his 60s, really, his late 50s, and then in his 60s. He's 66 now. And seeing him do this has been so inspirational for our family, and seeing him just draw on the motivation to complete this at 65, 66 years old, after a hip replacement and so many other things that had happened was pretty amazing. So we're going to talk about him completing the 7 summits, his climb on Denali, which was really intense, and these lessons that he's written to his grandkids along the way. It's really a special podcast, and I cannot wait for you guys to listen to this podcast. So without further ado, I bring on my dad, Gary Ervin. All right, so very excited to have a very important guest on today. This is my dad, Gary Ervin. Welcome to the podcast. I was just waiting for you to say something, and you were just smiling.
Hi.
We're really excited to have you on because if you guys have listened to the Living Fully podcast in the prior seasons, my dad did 2 episodes about these lessons that he writes to his grandkids during his mountaineering expeditions. And they've become 2 of the most listened to episodes on the podcast. So people really, really love this. And I know people are going to be really excited to kind of finish this out, because whenever we did the first podcast, it was February of 2020. So think of like, oh my gosh, how much life has happened since February of 2020. We hadn't even gone into the pandemic yet. Like nothing had happened with Blaze. I hadn't had Sunday. Like it is just the amount of life that we've lived in the last 4 years is crazy.
And from the mountaineering part of it, I physically went through a lot of trials. I had a hip replaced, and
hip replacement.
I had COVID came and just locked everything down. So there was a 3-year window where I was not inactive. I still love mountains. I was still going to Denver, and I was still climbing 14ers, and I was still doing things, but I didn't have the big long-term expeditions where I spend days alone in a mountain range, writing notes to my grandkids. So it was a gap. And when I read the last one, Sunday wasn't around, and what started all this was me missing Ford's birth. And so
Yep.
So, we fast forward and it's all about Denali, and it's all about finding the right time to do it. And then I'm pressured to get back. And if everything went perfect, I got back the morning you had her. So,
yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Everest was the week that Ford was born, that you climbed kind of like your first mountain in the 7 summits, if you don't count Kilimanjaro. And then, Denali, literally the week that I had Sunday. So, so the last time we talked, I think it was episode 32, and you had done 6 of the 7 summits. So it's wild because you kind of did them fast. You did bam, 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 bam. And then you had this really long lull and health challenges and pandemic challenges and all of this. But like you still kept your dream alive. And you were still bound and determined, even against my mom's wishes and Grandma and Papa's wishes. And, everybody's just like, okay, you've done enough. You're 60-something years old. Like, keep your feet on the ground. But you are just not someone that listens to that, because you live for a goal. And you're almost like scared to live life, I feel like, without a goal.
And that's something I constantly ask myself too. The goal is 7 summits, not 6 of the 7 summits. So I wasn't in Denali being the last one. It's one of the harder ones. You carry 130 pounds of gear. You have no Sherpa. You have nothing. Everything you've got is on your back or on a sled that you're pulling. So that added a lot more pressure. And then with all the drama that happened around it, sicknesses and COVID and everything else, it just added to the pressure. And then on top of that, I was going to have grandkid number 5 when I finally did get my first good summit push. So so it was I was always determined to finish it.
You had to. Once you started it, like, you'd put so much time and energy and effort and into it, and you just love it. I mean, something that you always taught us is to, like, choose what makes you happy. And you always say, like, if I'd listened to all the people and their stories of mountaineering and, like, all the pitfalls and stuff that you've also fallen into, it's like you'd never have stepped foot on a mountain. But, like, you love it. We don't understand it, but, like, you love it.
And everybody says, why? And, I said, find the one thing that you can do and have fun doing it by yourself with no people, no social media, no TV, no radio, and things that you can do day after day by yourself and have fun. And that's something that calls to you. And that's what mountains do. I can sit on a mountain for weeks and months at a time with no communications with the outside world or with anybody. And I just enjoy it. It seems like 3 days. After 3 days, you get used to the grind, and nature brings something out of you that it's hard to explain. And after 3 days, that becomes the normal, sleeping on a block of ice in a sleeping bag and the discomfort of the weather. And it's just something that has always called to me. Yeah.
Well, I love too, because it is such in our culture, we talk about it a lot, like comfort. People just chase comfort. And, so many advancements in technology and just the way that we live now, like, our lives are so comfortable, but there's such beauty in discomfort and pushing yourself. And it's just, I'm sure that is the ultimate reward, because it ain't comfortable. I mean, when I'm reading these blog posts, it like seems terrible. I always read them and I'm like, why in the world would you want to do that? Like, it's just a lot.
And part of the reason I write a lot of these notes down is it's hard. It's real easy to explain the discomfort, the beauty, the things that I've seen and felt, and the emotion that I've had at the top of these mountains. It's hard to describe. So, a lot of the reasons I write it down is maybe the people understand why I get what I get out of this, what the beautiful part of these mountains are. I know they can't see it through my eyes, and even a photo doesn't do it justice. But the whole question about 20 minutes on top of Everest was that worth 2 months? And And that's an easy answer. It was worth every second of it. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to explain the beauty and what drives me to do that.
Yeah.
It's easy to explain the pain.
Mm-hmm. But I love the vehicle of the lessons to your grandkids. And I think that was kind of just an idea that you had along with, okay, I'm going to do the 7 summits. Okay, I'm having a grandchild. Like, let's make something out of this and write these lessons to these grandkids. So, if somebody's listening and they don't even know what the 7 summits are, they haven't heard the other episode that we've done, explain what the 7 summits are. And like right now, how many people have done the 7 summits?
I guess when I did it, there were probably in between 400 and 500 that have done all 7.
In the history of like the world that's been recorded.
So, in the Grand Slam, there's less than 100, and that's the 7 summits in both poles. And what the 7 summits are is the highest point in every continent. And Kilimanjaro, that's another story. But I thought Denali was going to be my 7th summit. And if you see me on the top of my picture on top of Denali, I've got 7 fingers and my hip bone up.
Yeah, so, we'll talk about that.
That was what I thought was my final mountain. And then on the process of getting my certification for doing the 7 summits, and which required a summit photo, your diploma or your certificate for summit certificate, which I had one for Kilimanjaro. The Grand Slam it says very specifically the 7 highest points in every continent. And the summit in Kilimanjaro that I climbed wasn't Uhuru. It's hard to say. It's Swahili for peace. But I climbed Gilman's Point, which wasn't the highest point in Africa. So
you had to go back and do it again.
So
that was your last mountain.
Yeah, that was my last mountain.
Yeah. I think that, so the 7 summits are the highest point in all 7 continents.
Correct.
Okay. So they are, and you've done all these, Everest, let me see if I can know them. Everest, Aconcagua, Kilimanjaro, Denali, K1.
No, K1's in Asia with the same mountain.
Okay.
It's the 3rd highest.
Okay. Karsten's Pyramid.
In Indonesia, yeah.
Oh gosh.
Mount Vincent in Antarctica.
Oh yeah, I forget about that one. Mount Vincent. And then what's the other one?
You meant Carson's Pyramid. You did in Kilimanjaro. You said that. So as I did it, Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, Elbrus is the highest point in Europe.
Okay.
Everest, Mount Vincent, Punta Jaya, Carson's Pyramid, and then Denali.
Okay. So as of today, you have done all 7 summits.
Yes. They're all done.
They're all done.
I've got to do some of them almost twice.
Yeah, you have. Because some of them and we'll get to this, like in the stories and the lessons in some of these mountains, a lot of people ask me, like, gosh, does it not worry you? And like, it really worries my mom, Lisa, his wife. But for me, it doesn't, because you're such a smart climber. And you turn around when weather conditions aren't right, or when your, health isn't right. I mean, you've turned around 200 feet from a summit that you've climbed for 2 months, like, to make that summit. Like, you'll turn around. You won't risk your life. Like, I guess mountaineering as a sport is risking your life every time you do it. But, like, you're just such a smart climber that it doesn't worry me. But you have turned around, so many times.
I've turned around by my choice on 3 different mountains, and defining what that point is, how far you can take it, is one of the most important skills you can learn as a mountaineer. And that's the difference between people that die on a mountain and people that come home. That limp into base camp like I do. I made the promise to my family and Lisa that I'm not going to die on a mountain. And sometimes, I got really close on Island Peak. And it's just a freak thing where I ate some contaminated food and started bleeding internally and had to be rescued. And spent 9 days in an ICU ward in Kathmandu with transfusions and surgeries to repair the bleeding. But like in Everest in 16, it didn't feel right. Plus, there were people up there dying. There were people stuck up there. So, and I saw that, and I said, I'm not going to get to the point where I can't move anymore. So if my last bit of energy is going to get me down to a safe camp.
Yeah.
So that's part of the plan, and to retreat and to be able to get off that mountain. Most people in mountaineering say if you make it to the summit and you don't make it back, that doesn't count. Yeah.
So, that's a good line.
The only way you can count the summit of a mountain, and I had a good friend that his last summit was Everest, and he ended up dying on it. And most of the mountaineers say that it doesn't count if you die on the mountain. It's even if you made it to the summit, you've got to make it home to your family before you can count summiting.
Yeah. That's really something. I mean, this whole journey and this whole process has just been, as the family that was on the ground, something to see, especially because it wasn't like you started doing this when you were 38. Like you were in your 60s when you decided to start doing this, which is also, I think when I tell people, my dad's a mountain climber, and they're like, oh my gosh, how old is he? And I'm like, 67. Are you 67? 66. Oh, maybe an extra year. 66.
It's just
and they're like, oh my gosh, is he, the first question is always, is he in super good shape? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, he gets there, prepping for the mountains, but also you have something mentally that other people don't have. And it's just this mental toughness that helps you climb the mountain, I think, just as much as physical preparation.
And part of mountaineering is the being able to endure the pain of the conditions and the loneliness, mentally and physically. So there's two parts of it. One is to be able to get up every day and move another 3,000 or 4,000 feet up a mountain, and then get to a camp and get comfortable, get fed, and do it day in, day out. A lot of it is just some of it is how much you're able to tolerate mentally and physically, and that's I've always been fairly hard physically, not in great shape. There's a difference, and then mentally been fairly determined and think through problems that I come across on a mountain or in life.
So talking about Denali, since Denali is really the big mountain that you've climbed in the last few years since we did that first podcast. So let's talk a little bit about that mountain and then the lessons from that mountain. So Denali, if you guys aren't familiar with anything mountain climbing, it's a really hard mountain, says the person who hasn't climbed it. It's the tallest peak in North America, but it's climbed, what is it? Okay, so it's climbed alpine style instead of siege or expedition style. So you don't have yaks, you don't have Sherpas. It is just
no fixed ropes. You're tied to a team. You're tied to two other guys or three other guys. Hopefully one of them's a guide, but most of the times you're just roped together. And and Denali, Everest, you worry about falling off a mountain, and Denali, you worry about falling into the mountain. So very bad cracks, crevices, and most of the fatalities in Denali are falling through ice bridges and falling into the mountain.
So when you climbed Denali so you had attempted Denali and you turned around. That was one of the mountains that you had turned around on. It was kind of a team thing. And then this last time, so it was in 2023, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Denali was in 2023. And this was also after your hip replacement, but you brought your hip with you. He brought his hipbone with him because he felt like he had to have it intact. And he said he didn't want to leave it at the top of the mountain because he said it would be littering, and he really wanted all of his grandkids to bring it to show and tell. This is my grandpa's hip that went with him to the top of Everest and Denali, and that is so funny.
The funny part was, and his name's Dr. Krager, the surgeon here in town. When he told me that I needed the hip replaced, it was before I went to Denali, and your mother was with me, and I said I'd do it on if you give me two things, I said, one is I want it done quickly because I want to try to climb. And he already told me that I'd be climbing in 2 months if he let me replace it. And I said, okay, I want it done quickly because I want to be climbing in 2 months. And then he said, what's your other one? I said, I want my hip bone back. And he said, I've done 3,000 surgeries. I've never had anybody ask for their hip bone back.
My gosh.
I told him the story. I said, it's carried me up 6 of the 7 summits, and I want to carry it up the 7th. And my mom, or your mom, was with me. Lisa was appalled. She was saying, Dad, you sound like the biggest redneck in the world. And you're embarrassing me. And I said, well, my first one was I was going to make a pair of earrings for you with it. But Dr. Krager understood it, and he says, I will get your hip bone back. And it took me a month, and it got back in a tub of formaldehyde.
Yeah, it was so nasty. You kept it in the fridge.
Yeah. Until I got it freeze dried.
Gross.
But that's the story with my hip bone. But it was probably the best thing I ever did. I was struggling. I was taking shots in my hips to train. I was taking shots in my hip to climb. And once I got it replaced, the hip replacement was probably the best thing surgically I've ever done.
Yeah. So you had all of the ailments of just the world, the pandemic, and then you had a hip replacement, and then, all these things that kind of as a family that we had with Jade losing Blaze. But all the while, like, how was your preparation for this? Was it more just like finding the right time and making sure that you were in good enough shape?
Yeah. Preparation is something that you can't just, even like a marathon, which we ran a bunch of, you can train for a marathon in 2 or 3 months. These big mountains, like Denali, carrying that much weight, pulling a sled, the alpine type ascent, you're not working fixed ropes. You're working with a team. It requires a little bit different skills. So preparation takes years. Usually when I set up a mountain, I will say, what's it going to take for the next one, what I'm going to climb next, and how do I prepare for it? And then the training, like for Kilimanjaro, is very light packs. You've got porters that that climb with you, and they carry your tents with. So the difference is there's differences on every mountain, and you train differently. But it's something that you got to do research on, find out what the technical parts of it are, and then train for those specifically.
Yeah, which is why when we go on family vacation, instead of laying on the beach with all of us and building sandcastles with his grandkids, he's stuffing a pack and wearing snow boots. He's stuffing a pack with sand with their little sandcastle shovels and just walking down the beach like a lunatic while everybody's relaxing. It's just, you are so committed to this. And I guess you were training for Denali when we were at the beach last year, when you just kept trudging back and forth with your huge backpack of
that was
sand.
Fun training. It was 4 hours on the beach and with the
gosh.
80 pounds of sand in a backpack.
I got about Ford and Shepherd, what they're gonna say about you and think about you. We talk about Papa all the time. All the things I remember, I'm like, man, they are gonna remember some epic stuff.
I got the worst knee burns that I ever got.
Oh gosh, that's wild. Okay, so let's talk about the summit of Denali. So you have this. So he brings his pen that freezes up because it's so cold on the top of the mountain, and his notepad, and then he brings all these lessons down, and we kind of go through and decipher them. And he's just got this really cool wisdom of things that he thinks in this serene environment on the mountain as he's going through these things. So it's Lao Tzu that says that quote about I think it's a journey of 1,000 miles but must begin with a single step. But I thought it was interesting because you brought that into your Denali lesson, which was essentially your last mountain. So your lesson to your grandkids in that was that be a doer, not a dreamer. Take that single step. Let the journey begin.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
In mountaineering, when you stand at the bottom of a mountain, you look up to the top. It's so intimidating. The mountain looks so big, and to say that in 2 months or 2 weeks. I'm going to be up there. And you can't think about that. You got to think about the first step you take, and the next step you take, and then the step after that. And that's kind of what that was about. Is the first step that I took was Kilimanjaro with Luke and Gabe, and the last step was, I thought, Denali, and it was a lesson to my grandkids about, decide what you want to do in life, or in mountaineering or whatever, and take that first step.
Yeah.
Don't dream about it. The difference in a doer and a dreamer is the action you take.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Be the doer, not the dreamer. And what a lesson too, because I think about that too. I mean, I think about it when we're skiing even, and I look at these mountains and I think about you, and I'm like, what in the, how does a human body go from the bottom of that to the top of that? And these aren't even some of the biggest mountains on the planet. So just the single step, how the journey begins with a single step. I think that's a really, really good lesson. Okay, so this other lesson is a funny lesson, because some of his lessons are deep, like that, be the doer, not the dreamer, big life stuff. And then some of his lessons are so simple and quirky and funny, but so true. So tell me the story about when you're at the base and you're in Anchorage and you saw all those older people who were there on an expedition, with their big iPads out taking pictures and stuff, because you have this lesson that's such an awesome lesson to your grandkids that say, be kind to old people, especially your grandpa. Fanny packs are cool. So tell me the story behind that one.
So it was the year I summited in Lakeview Hotel in Anchorage, and it's a beautiful hotel right on a lake with all the seaplanes landing on it, and I would get up in the morning and I'd see these herds of people my age. I was a week from being 65. In June, July 13th, I become 65. So these people were my age. They would come down with their hiking boots and their hiking pants, and they would be waiting for the big tour bus to come get them and drive them up to the glacier. And where I was going to get dropped off on the glacier with my gear and everything for the next 2 weeks. And I've kind of observed them. They would, every morning they would get up, and because I was preparing for the mountain. I was getting my food, getting my packs ready, meeting my guides and teams, and so every morning I would get up, and it was kind of like they would start congregating, and there were animals all in the lobby of this hotel, and they were walking around with big iPads, and they were FaceTiming their grandkids. And in their iPads, and then they were turning around showing a picture of the polar bear, and then they'd get back and they were talking real loud, and I was just, it was so funny to watch, and then all of a sudden the breakfast buffet opened, and then I said they scattered like wildebeest on the plains. But the fanny packs were cool. I said that was a nifty idea. The hiking boots, and then after the buffet happened, they loaded up on their bus and they disappeared.
That is so funny. You said though at the end of the lesson, you were like, I realized these are my people.
They are. They were probably the same age. So.
Yeah, same age. You guys were just doing two totally different things on that mountain. So that was a really funny lesson though. And it's so true. Be kind to old people, especially your grandpa. Fanny packs are cool. That's a good one. Okay, so now this was a really interesting one. So, and it leads to a big question that a lot of people always ask me is what is your mental state during the climb? But the lesson to your grandkids, because you always talk about you can't overthink things. You have to kind of concentrate on the task at hand. And it's something that I see you do in life too. I don't feel like you overthink a lot of things. I do feel like you're able to singularly focus on a task, which is why you've been successful in other things that weren't mountaineering. But you say this lesson really in a cool way. You say, spend the first part of your day like you're shipwrecked. Get the necessary things done. Don't forget food, water, shelter. And then you can plan for what's next. Necessary things may not always be food, water, shelter, but things like your health, your family, your work. Make sure these are secure before the clouds come in. So tell me a little bit about where that lesson came from.
I guess when I got dumped on the glacier, so you get on a seaplane, you get on a plane with skis on it in Tautigna, and you fly out and you get dropped, and you're on a big block of ice with this huge mountain looming behind you, and then you look and your stuff is just thrown off the plane and scattered everywhere, and that's everything you've got for the next 3 weeks or 25 days is how long your permit's for, and you feel like a shipwreck, and what you got to do is you got to secure shelter because it's cold up there. You got to melt water for drinking and for cooking. You've got fuel tanks. You got gear you got to supply, and then you've got this whole series of going to the next area that you're going to camp, burying your caching food and stuff, and then coming back, getting your tents and sleeping bags, and walking back up. So it's a lot of preparation. Getting it done early is, I think, what I was getting to on that. Taking on big tasks early in the day, and then other things that need to be taken care of, prioritizing what's important, what's not, is kind of what that message was about.
Yeah, that's a good one. And something that I feel like a lot of us forget, because so many times, like in your life, you just go with like whatever takes your attention first. But like, that's a great lesson of focusing on the things that matter, focusing on your priorities. Yeah, I love that. Okay. So another question that a lot of people always ask me that I've heard you talk about, and you wrote about it in some of your lessons, is it hard being away from your family, like during the climbs? Like I obviously it is, but like you spent your 38th wedding anniversary on the mountain, you miss a lot of events, you miss work, you miss things with your friends. So, it's a big price to pay for these big mountains. And so I guess like the question here is, you always talk about how it makes you a better person. Like the mountains make you a better person for all those people that you're sacrificing all of that time, and that kind of outweighs it. So talk a little bit about that. Like, what do you feel like the mountains give you, as a person that you bring back home? Because I know it is hard being away from all those people. And
I miss everybody. I miss, my family, my wife, people at work, but when I come back, I'm hungry. I'm hungry to be better at everything I do. I feel either relieved that I got it done, or frustrated that I didn't, and what I need to do next time. So one is, I miss my family, but you can't dwell on it. Like the lesson earlier, you've got to prepare yourself for what's next. You got to make sure that you're thinking about yourself and your self-care, that you got to make sure that you've got enough food in you, the calories to work the next day, and enough water that you're carrying that you're not going to get dehydrated, and enough clothes that you're packing, in the right clothes that you're going to stay warm and not lose toes and fingers. So those are things, you miss your family, but you've also got to focus on what you're doing out there.
Yeah.
And it may sound bad, but it's probably harder on my family than it is me, because it's actually pretty busy, the preparation, where my family sits there and thinks about me all day long, and I'm trying to think about, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to get across this crevice, or how I'm going to get up this ice wall, or those type of things.
And your kind of lesson when you were talking about that with the Denali climb was, and how you dealt with being away from your family, is you said, lesson to grandkids: finish what you start, but keep balance. Weigh the price of your actions against the outcome. Balance the focus on self and others. And you just explained that really well, I feel like, because the price of you not finishing that mountain, you wouldn't have been the same person to all those people on the ground, because I've seen you've got an itch to do something, and it's like you're obsessed with it, and it's just you had to do that. And I like that, finish what you start, because I feel like a lot of us don't finish what we start, especially if it's really hard.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't want my grandkids to start something and quit because it's hard. So So the fact that it's hard, it makes the finishing it even that much more special.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so now let's go like you're about to summit. So I love this lesson to the grandkids because it's very simple, and I've heard it before, but when I read it, it was very powerful. And you wrote it actually to Sunday because as he was climbing Denali, if he finished it perfectly and got down the mountain at the perfect time, he got on the plane and he made it before she was born. He missed the window by like 3 hours after he summited. He came down, he missed the window by 3 hours. He shouldn't have pushed himself though. So he made it while I was still in the hospital for, that Sunday was born. But right before, like you had finished, we'll talk about the summit in a second, but you say, this lesson to Sunday specifically, because you had just found out at the bottom of the mountain when you were getting ready to board the plane that you'd had a granddaughter. You were so excited, first girl, and I don't know if we've said this on a podcast before, but like you really wanted a boy when you had me, and I was a girl. And then he said after he had me, he would have had all girls.
Yeah,
he said sorry to my brothers. Yeah. He likes them too, yeah. But you do really like girls. Girls are special.
They were tomboys. They fished with me. They did things, rode 4-wheelers. There wasn't anything that you and your sister did that the two boys didn't.
True. Very true. So you said this lesson to grandkids: motivation can come from many places, but the best motivation is created from within. So talk to me about that summit, because this was the summit that was the culmination of the 7 summits, something that you had been doing for 10 years, something you'd sacrificed months of your life and people had begged you not to do, and something that was really dangerous and you knew, but you were motivated from within. So talk to me about that summit push.
And the reason I wrote that is I did have challenges motivating myself. There are so many things I could turn to say that's why I shouldn't do it. I'm going to be 65. I got a hip that's not been really tested. It's more weight than I've ever carried up a mountain. There were so many things I could point to, and everybody says, "Well, that's all right. 6 of the 7's not bad." And to stay motivated, I really had to push myself. So it was. There were so many things that I could have taken the easy way out. I could have said, "Yeah, I'm getting old and I got a bad hip. I got that's a lot of weight to carry. I've never carried that much weight up a mountain." And so I really had to draw on my motivation. So. And how I did that is I trained really, really hard. I would go to Telluride. I failed the year before, so I knew what kind of team I had to have. I had 2 young climbers that were combined age 50 years old. I was 65 that were strong, and it was me and those 2 guides. And so I had a good team. I had prepared more than I ever had for any other mountain, and it was to motivate myself to continue to go and train and prepare. I kept saying there's one more mountain, and this was my last attempt. This was probably after 3 years. I say that this was my last attempt at Denali, but had I not made it, and if I gotten close, there probably would have been another attempt. But I struggled with motivating myself. And, and if I listened to other people, they would have given me a way out. They would have said, "You don't need to do that. What are you trying to prove?" And it was something that I had to really prove to myself, not to other people. And I had to draw on, internal motivation. And that's what I was talking about in that. And that's what my grandkids, I want them not to be motivated because other people are doing something. I want them to be motivated because it's something they really love to do and they want to be doing that. Yeah. So that's self-motivation, not following, doing.
Yeah. Okay, so you're pushing to the mountain. So walk me through the actual summit. So, like, most people don't know, like, what it's like, when you summit a mountain. And I know all the different mountains are different, but Denali, it's very intense, very cold. So you get to the top, and you have to take a picture of yourself with your mask down at the summit of each mountain to qualify for the 7 summits. And it's how cold at the top of the mountains?
It was minus 15 when I started, and it was probably colder than that. And in a 20-mile-an-hour wind, so it was wind chilled was in the minus 30s probably, which is not bad. It was a good sunny day. And the funny part about it is days before that I had a real bad bout of vertigo, and I thought my climb was over. And so I was so distraught earlier in the climb, and when I finally made it up to high camp, it was a tough 2-day climb along it's called the 16 Ridge. It's along a rocky ridge that you're wearing crampons. You had to climb a big ice wall and dig up a cache that you had, and it was a ton of work. And I got to the 17 camp, which was where you attacked the summit from, and I got to that point, and I said, I think I've got this. I feel so strong, and a lot of it was getting over the vertigo that I had earlier, and I just felt this sense of, I don't need food, water. I can do it. So what you're getting at, it was so I got to the summit, and so every summit I've ever been on has been just a real emotional thing, and so I got to the summit, and I'm happy. I'm laughing at my hipbone picture, and the guides are taking pictures, and then they call home. So they call for a dispatch, and they get a satellite phone, and they hand me the satellite phone. They said, "Gary, well, you want to say something?" And I get the phone, and I just emotionally just break down. I just every bit of the last 10 years came up, and I couldn't say anything. And it is being recorded, and they got everything on dispatch. And they said, the guides are talking. We're on the summit of Denali, and it's been a beautiful climb, a beautiful day. Everything's going great.
I remember it. Mom was here.
They give me the phone. I go, woo-hoo. So I can't talk. And it's just, it got really emotional. And I tell everybody, other than Everest, every summit I've ever got to was emotional like that. It's whenever you plan and you work so hard to get to a point in life, even in business or the harder you work for something, when you get there, it's emotional. And Everest, I didn't get emotional because I knew that most people died on the way down, and I had 2 days to get down to base camp. I got emotional when I got to base camp, and the Sherpa beat on the pants. But Denali, when I got up there, and it's still on my dispatch, I couldn't talk, and then 2 days later, I finally got off the mountain and home to see Sunday.
Oh no. And when you come home, it's like such an awesome thing, but his body is on the ground, but his mind is still on the mountain. That's what we always say. Because he checks out and is so in like a zone. I feel like when you're climbing, you're so deep, you're so connected to yourself, and I feel like there's just like something in you that you have to do this, and you're so connected to that, like when you're climbing these mountains. So it's probably really hard to come back down to the earth and all the trivial things that people worry about and do and are teaching their kids and are, anxious about. I bet that's really hard to integrate back into. But I need to call out this lesson because I really like this lesson. When you were talking about the vertigo that you had right before the summit, and you thought that it was about to take you out, you were so upset about it, and thank goodness, like the doctor had cleared you, and you said you opened I think that's when you said you opened the tent and it was like a beautiful day, or you like how thankful you were that that had happened. And you said your lessons to your grandkids, sometimes when you least expect it, the world starts spinning. Determine a direction, up or down, and follow it. Spinning around, you stay where you are, redetermine the direction, and get things moving. I thought that was really good. Because it's so true. Like, you, of all things, you've never had vertigo on a mountain.
No, I think I've never had it before ever. And
Yeah.
I was in a little bitty one-man tent. I never was able to get up, and so it was just from laying down inside the tent. And the spooky part about that, and up or down, is I was in this state where they were calling doctors. They started giving me Benadryl, and I was right by the Camp 14 has has the Park Service there, and was I going up, continuing on my summit? I had to get my head cleared, or was I going to retreat again and have to go down? And for a day, I sat in a tent spinning with vertigo, taking Benadryl and trying to get my head cleared. And I wrote that during that. And I said, I've got to either decide one way or the other, or it's going to be decided for me.
Yeah.
And luckily, it cleared. I was able to do a test climb to a rocky point called the Edge of the World, and performed well, and I was able to continue on.
Gosh.
But either way, I was going to have to be fine with the decision to go down because my health required it, or I was going to get better and go up. And the spinning that I did in that day or two was the reason for that post.
Yeah. That's awesome. So then after this post, you pushed to the summit. We've already talked about that, but the lesson as you were pushing to the summit that I want to call out, you've already said it, but you said lessons to grandkids. The mountain makes you superhuman. When you embrace things you can control and overcome it, it gives you energy. At this point, I don't need sleep or food. The wind and cold doesn't affect me. My strength is coming from this mountain. I feel so blessed to be here. That's what you were writing. Yeah. And you were talking about that a while ago, and that's like such a cool thing, like to feel superhuman in that type of environment where when you're in, I feel like environments like that where it's just so hard on you. I feel like those are the times I feel the most human. I feel like my body's breaking down, and I look at all the things and then the negative thoughts that you call the gremlins, which I want to talk about the gremlins. I feel like I feel so human in those moments. So I thought it was such a cool lesson that you said that's when you felt superhuman. Like the energy was coming from the mountain. And that was such a special lesson, I think, to your grandkids too. Talk a little bit about that.
You know, probably from the spinning, I had 2 real hard days. I climbed an ice wall right above Camp 4 first time with a heavy pack and buried it, and the second time with another heavy pack, my tent, and dug up my cache and walked all the way to 17 Camp. Had to saw ice blocks, put a tent up and build an ice wall around the tent because the wind was howling to where it was tore a tent to shreds. And you know, I got all of this work done, and I remember writing that. I was so proud of myself. I said, you know, I went from a point of despair to a point where, you know, I was out of food. I was a day of weather that I had to stay in the tent. But I just felt so invincible at the time.
Yeah.
So that's probably a little cocky, which, you know, those type of things that are things that you got to check yourself with because you're not invincible. That mountain can kill you in a heartbeat, and things can happen. But that night in the tent, the night before our summit push, I felt strong, and I was out of food. I was out of just about everything, and had one more night with a good weather window. And so I just
Gosh.
knew that night that I had it. So
That's awesome.
I just remember the feeling and superhuman. You know, and where was I getting my strength from? And it was the overcoming the mountain, overcoming the obstacles, and I just felt strong. 2 days earlier, I felt weak. So it's that's part of mountaineering. Is taking those days one day at a time.
How cool though to feel like that, to feel like, I love that word, to feel superhuman too. At 65 years old on Denali, I mean, you know, at 30 years old when you were building your businesses and working and just hustling and figuring it out, you know, if somebody would have told you like you're going to have this day at 65 years old. You're about to summit the 7th summit. Like you did it like that. Wonder if you would have believed it. Well, you probably would have because you knew.
I didn't know I was going to be an alpine mountaineer until I was 56 years old. So no, it was, and I never dreamed that I would be able to do Everest. I never dreamed. I was over 60 when I did Everest. I was a week from drawing my first Social Security check when I did Denali. So you know, I knew that I wanted to climb the 7 summits, and that was just one of the ones that I've been preparing a long time for.
Yeah.
So that's and that feeling, I still remember it so clearly. But I also remember the nights of despair, and those come too.
But it's worth it when you get to experience like a moment like that. Yeah. It's so cool that you had that pen and paper, because you say you're so out of it, almost to the point of hallucination, and you can't remember a lot of those things. So calling out these lessons and bringing this wisdom home, it makes it so much more than just your experience. Like we get to experience that too. That's such a cool thing to read, and to you feel like you're a part of it a little bit. And you know what I think is very inspiring? You know, I have a lot of people that are in their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s that follow my content and that listen. And I mean, I'm not that far from my 40s. And I think that you are such an example of just living life until the very end. Like, it is just wild that you're summiting, not climbing. Some people say they climb Mount Everest and they go to base camp, but like he is summiting Mount Everest in his 60s. Like, it's just, what do you have to say to people that are maybe in their 60s that feel like all of that kind of stuff, maybe it's not mountaineering, but just all of that push yourself to the limit is over for them?
Oh, it's a cliche that age is a number, and I say it's a state of mind. I have a lot of young guys that say, "How do you do that? What advice would you give me?" And I'd say my first advice is don't wait till you're 60. You know, it would have been much easier if I would have done it when I was in my 30s, but the opportunity didn't open I didn't open my eyes to the opportunity. I didn't have the ability. You know, I had a family, I had a business, and I was busy with life. It wasn't until you guys get out of the house and financially I'm secure enough to where I can do things like this, that I could do it and not feel bad about I'm sacrificing people around me that work with me because I'm gone. I needed every minute I had at work, or I needed every spare minute I had with my family, going to ball games and wrestling matches and singing events. So that was a stage in my life in my 60s, in my late 50s, that I had more time for myself. And so I guess what I would tell people in their 50s and 60s is that's not too old. You know, you're at a point where you've made it through the battle of families and business, and retirement is climbing mountains for me. Yeah. So become an alpine mountaineer at 60 is possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's and it's so true. I mean, I don't think a lot of people think of those years as like when your life can open up to the opportunity to do things like this. I feel like so many people think all of the good stuff happens when you're young, and you're a testament to, and mom too, because mom has always embraced her age. And I think as a woman that's pretty rare, but she's always like, I love being a grandparent. I don't want to go backwards to when everybody was little and stuff. Like, I love this phase, and I love being 66. She's always just like, and I admire that in her, and I admire it in you. And I think it's rare because a lot of people don't feel like that. So I think that's really cool. That's kind of a lesson to all of us. I guess a lesson to your grandkids too, because your grandkids will be 50 and 60 one day too, you know? Okay. So we're almost done. And just like my dad thought he was done in his journey of climbing the 7 summits after that push for Denali. Then he comes home, and then he finally gets his granddaughter named Sunday. And Sunday, I loved the name Sunday always. But then the fact that he summited the 7 summits as she was being born, and it was like Sunday is the 7th day, and it was my 7th pregnancy because I'd had 4 miscarriages before her. Like, it was just such a sign that, like, Sunday was supposed to be her name, and that was just so cool. And, Blaze was her middle name, which, in the past few years of him training for the mountain, my sister had lost her little boy Blaze, and that was just such a celebration. Your first granddaughter, and you coming home and finishing the summits and being healthy and like not coming back with some major injury. I will remember that. Like, you remember the summit, and you remember that day where you felt superhuman. That when you came to visit Sunday in the hospital, that was my kind of like the out of body superhuman. Like, that was just really cool. Because also, in your own life, you don't think of your dad like coming to see you, having your 3rd baby in the hospital in your late 30s or your mid 30s, coming off of Denali, from just summiting Denali. It was just like, it was one of those moments where I was like, man, our life is, our family is doing cool things.
Another thing, Sunday was your Denali. You struggled with Sunday. You had gestational diabetes. You had problems. You had problems before getting pregnant with Sunday. So you've had to you had to climb a mountain. Tried to climb the mountain several times.
Yeah.
And, Sunday was a celebration. That was a summit. That was a hard fought battle to have my first granddaughter. So that's this. It kind of, I never thought of it that way, but it's kind of the same thing with me and Denali.
Yeah, I never did either. That's
you should have
really
named
cool.
her Denali.
Yeah, right.
No.
A lot of people were like, you should name it Everest if it's a boy, or Summit. And I was like, okay, guys. Like, we let's
like
just
Sunday.
and the 7s and the... I did like the name 7 for a boy. I was like, we'll find a way to put this in. I mean, it is ingrained in her. So I want to finish this podcast talking about a little... So you thought that the summits were done. You thought Denali's your 7th summit. And then he decides, because he just can't seem to quit, that he's going to do the Grand Slam, which is the 7 summits plus the North Pole and the South Pole expedition, which, how many people have done that? Like 100 maybe?
I think it's in the 70s.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
So less than 100.
So then he decides he's going to do this, much to my mother's demise, because it drives her insane.
There's no mountains on the North and South Pole. So.
Yeah, it's more like an expedition. So that's his next things that he's going to do. But in studying for the Grand Slam and kind of researching the mountains, he realized that when he had done Kilimanjaro, which was his first mountain that he did, which he did with my brothers, who like almost died on the climb because they had just graduated college and high school, and they were like so out of shape. Gabe was climbing in like denim shorts.
George.
Yeah. His nose was bleeding the whole time. He was like saying his final prayers every night. It was like terrible. Luke was like, barely making it up. Luke had gained like 50 pounds in high school or college after being a high school wrestler and like cutting weight. And so he didn't really get in good shape. But they did summit what they thought was the summit. And then he found out that it's not the summit of like the highest mountain. It's the highest peak on each continent.
Yes.
And there's 3 peaks on Kilimanjaro, right? So you had to go back and do Kilimanjaro again to count for the 7 summits.
Yeah. It's so the highest point in Africa is the peak, one of the 3 peaks in Kilimanjaro. It's Gillam's Stella Point and Uruhu. And now I've climbed all 3 of them. So I've got a certificate with all 3 peaks on it. But I learned that I wasn't on the highest point in Africa. And so it gave me another excuse to go train.
But I love the lessons from Kilimanjaro, because Kilimanjaro is one of your favorite mountains because it's kind of like a bright, joy-filled climb. So you start out in rainforest and you end in a glacier, but you always talk about like the joy of the people on that mountain.
Yeah.
And it's not like a super hard, like you don't have to have a ton of gear and you don't have to have, it's just a different kind of climb. So you wrote some really cool lessons going back and redoing Kilimanjaro after you thought that you were done. And at the beginning of that climb, you talked again about like why you do it. Like, lessons to your grandkids, your why. You restated your why. So you said, I climb for many reasons. The beauty of the mountain, the beauty of the people I meet, to challenge myself physically and mentally, to see the last few 100 yards of the mountain that I hadn't seen before. But talk a little bit about like your why and why you restated that why, even doing like Kilimanjaro again.
I think that post was my last mountain, and go on and talk about how it probably, after I said that, my why and the beauty of Kilimanjaro is it's a beautiful mountain, but it's also you travel with porters, and the porters are local villagers that pack the kitchen tent and all of the gear and the food, and there's rules. They can't carry over 40 pounds, so you have to have like 10 of them to carry enough gear for two people and themselves, and every day you have a hard day. These guys are so joyful. They're singing and dancing, and they make you sing and dance with them. And it's to see the happiness where they live in these very villages with very few possessions, and they've worked so hard getting to that next camp, a lot harder than I did. And they get there and they put the tents up, and then after they get their work done, they sing and dance.
That's so awesome.
They're joyful, and you sit there and you can think about, I'm tired, my back hurts, my leg hurts, my feet hurt, and you see these guys singing the jumbo song and dancing, and then they drag you into the middle of the circle and you got to dance with them, and that's part of the beauty, the culture that is around it. And that's Africa. There's so many things. The migration was going on this time, and I was able to spend 2 days in Africa seeing the migration, and it was the birthing migration. So they were, wildebeest and zebras were having babies, and the predators were chasing the babies around, and so it was amazing. And that's part of Africa. It's just, you have so many different. The mountain, you start climbing in the rainforest with monkeys barking at you, and you end up in the volcano, in a glacier, in a volcano. So the diversity of that mountain is just like none other. So that's kind of, it began and ended there. So
it's cool though, that because that was one of your lessons to your grandkids was dance. And like celebrate everything. Like these porters. That was such a special lesson too. Like, you've done so much in your life, not only the 7 summits, but you have built big businesses from nothing at all. You have kept together a family business. You've kept together a family. So to think of, I think that is certainly no coincidence that you had to go back and redo Kilimanjaro, which felt like a celebration, because you needed to celebrate, not only doing the 7 summits, but like everything that you have followed through and finished and built and done. And that's, I think, a lesson to your grandkids that, you called it out with saying dance and celebrate everything like the porters, but like so many people forget to just like celebrate, to celebrate it and to have fun. And so many people, they live their lives so downtrodden and like, this happened to me, so I can never do those great things. Or like, my mind just isn't like that, or I have family circumstances. And it's certainly like, it's not a cakewalk for a lot of people. And a lot of people have to climb out of a hole before they can even get on level ground to think about like being a dreamer or a doer. But I think that is fantastic, that was your last experience with your last mountain, that it was a celebration. And I want to end with like two of the lessons that you talked about on Kilimanjaro too, because I think that they're really powerful and they're good ones to end with. But speaking of people and like being in their own heads and thinking that they can't do anything like the things maybe that you've done or that other people have done, you talk about your negative thoughts. And a lot of people might look at you and think, well, he doesn't really have that many negative thoughts if he's able to do something like this. But you said you do. You fight and you call them the gremlins. And you say they really creep up a lot of times, like when you're in your camp or like when you're sleeping and stuff like that. And how, there was a lesson to your grandkids that says gremlins, in parentheses, negative thoughts can be beaten by positive thinking. I talk through things. I've done this before. The bad night will not affect my day tomorrow. It will be better. I will get to the top of this mountain, and then you go to sleep. It's like you combat these gremlins with positive thinking. You remind yourself that you have done these things before. But talk just a little bit about that, like the gremlins.
Yeah, it was, it was probably two things. One is I may have overestimated the toughness of this mountain. We were in rainy season, so it rained every night. My sleeping bag got wet. My clothes got wet. Everything got wet. So it was tough sleeping when it was raining hard. It was I didn't spend time at altitude or training before I went there. Mm-hmm. So I was having apnea and breathing problems even as early as 12,000 feet, which usually I don't feel it to 16 to 18,000 feet. And I started saying, oh no, I should have trained at altitude harder. So, I started saying, well, if I'm having this much problems at 12,000 feet, and it was the gremlins, it was saying, well, I can't do this. Or I didn't sleep tonight because it rained and I had to turn around sideways and let the water puddle up in the bottom of my tent. And I was getting these negative thoughts, and apnea, what happens is when you get real relaxed and you go to sleep, you wake up in a panic like you're smothering and you can't breathe. And you got to really slow your breath down and your heart rate's screaming. And you finally got to talk yourself back to sleep. And you go through this same cycle every 30 minutes or so. So, those are, and then you start thinking, will this affect my day tomorrow? Will I struggle on the climb? I got a 4,000-foot day tomorrow. I'm at vertical, and I got the Branca wall that I got to climb, and it's raining. Is it going to be slick? Is it going to be icy? And those are all things that start popping up in that are worthless thoughts. Mm-hmm. You can't do anything about them. What you can do about is try to get as much sleep as you can. Try to relax as much as you can, and then get out that morning and then think positive things. I've got an icy wall in front of me, or I got my clothes are wet that I got to dry out and go through it. But you got to think around those gremlins. And how you do that is confidence. One is, I've been in worse situations than this. Yep. I've dealt with this before. I know what it is, and just say, I've got this. It's like being superhuman in Denali. But when the gremlins start happening, you got to really fight those off with positive thinking, and that's kind of was the message, because I did have them on an easy mountain.
Yeah. That happens a lot in life, I feel like, and that's a really great lesson. Okay, and then lastly, with Kilimanjaro, which you are very much a creature of habit, so it does not surprise me that you wore the exact same shirt with holes and stains, exact same pants with holes and stains, exact same gear, your tent, like with all the little tape all over it, like you love things like that. And I think that that's really cool that 10 years later, you finished out your climb on the mountain, that you started your climb essentially with your two sons, unknowingly on your journey of 7 summits, because you didn't know you were doing the 7 summits when you climbed that first mountain with Luke and Gabe. And you said, the lesson to your grandkids was, and I loved this one is so you, is stay with what you got. Same guide, same climbing partner, same clothes. I know it worked 10 years ago. Why would I change something that works?
Yeah. And it was the exact same guide. He remembered. And the porters, they got a kick out of it. They called me Babu, which is Swahili for
grandpa.
So when I called Amos, the guide, he remembered it 10 years ago. Yes, your two boys, Babu.
Oh my gosh.
And Luke, at the time, he had his freshman 15 or 50. They called him.
We can joke about this, you guys, because we're a wrestling family, and like they just go up and down in weight like it ain't no thing. Yeah. They were calling him what?
Kabuko,
which means hippo in Swahili. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Luke doesn't care if we tell that joke on him because that's so funny. I don't think I'd want to be called hippo or grandpa.
Yeah. Well, Grandpa didn't know what it was because I would have just porters walk up to me and they would say Babu, and I asked the guy, what does that mean? He said, that's Supreme Grandpa, or no, Supreme Papa, because they call you Papa or Mama. It's Supreme Papa.
Oh, so you thought it was a good thing?
Yeah, I said that's a good dad, and I said, oh, that's cool. And then I look up in the translator, and it's Grandpa. So,
oh my gosh, that's so funny. And you were like, I was a lot grayer when I went back 10 years later.
Yeah.
You said you actually looked like a grandpa.
Yeah,
well, you actually were a grandpa.
I was a grandpa 5 times. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you certainly
6 times.
6 times. Gosh, yeah. You certainly are a great grandpa in this phase, but I can't even imagine like when they get to the phase where they are curious about life and in need of wisdom and are into hearing these stories of our family legacy, because like this is a gift that they don't even realize that they're about to get. And I love how you said at the end of the Kilimanjaro climb, you were just like, maybe in 10 years when I'm 76, one of my grandkids will climb Kilimanjaro with me.
Yeah.
So.
Or Everest.
Or Everest.
I'll go to base camp and watch them summit Everest when I'm 76. So.
Well, so this podcast has come to an end, even though I wish that it didn't, because it's definitely one of my favorites. And what a journey. I know people tell you how awesome it is every single day that you did the 7 summits, but I don't know that I've ever actually told you that I think it's really amazing that you did that, and that you're such an inspiration to me always. But like as I kind of get older and I look at like the next half of my life, I think that like you're a greater inspiration in this part of your life than any of the huge businesses that you built and all of the stuff that you did, being a present dad for us growing up, because this is just truly like otherworldly what you're doing now. So I think it's really awesome that you did that. And I also like anytime Mom was like hating on you for doing it, I always took up for you. Yeah. She liked it that he did it whenever he got on the ground. She was just ready for it to be over, but I was like, yeah,
and I'm glad, I appreciate you saying that. And you grew up, we grew up together, and went through life and business and everything. And my focus now is how to be a better grandpa, and what lessons, what I want my kids or grandkids. I think what makes me tick, but I'm not sure my grandkids do now. And I think as they grow, me leaving this story for them, and how to age with grace may be part of it, how to fight it tooth and nail, and how to continue to do hard things at an older age, is maybe another lesson that I want to leave with them. So I'm still focused on how I think y'all have kind of gone on your own, and my kids I'm very proud of. They've accomplished great things, and I want my grandkids to do the same thing and accomplish great things. So that's my part, and hopefully my story they can look at and say, well, I'm complaining about the weather in Nashville, Tennessee, and my grandpa, when I was born, was on this base camp at Everest. So, that may be what I hope to leave to my grandkids.
Yeah, do hard things. And don't fall into the trap of just wanting to live a comfortable life. I think that's something that you've taught me through your journey of the 7 summits too. And I hope that this podcast has been as enlightening and as amazing for you guys as it was for me, just sitting here. And I mean, he's my own dad and I already know all these things about him, but it's just like hearing him talk about it and like restating these lessons. It's just really special and powerful. And I'm so grateful that I got to bring it onto the podcast, because I know that this is going to be a lot of people's favorite episode. So thanks.
I feel like I always babble through it.
No, you don't.
Hopefully I left a message
Babu.
in there. Yeah.
So I will leave. Thanks, Dad, for coming on. And I will leave all of my dad's information where you can follow along on his blogs. He has a website, GaryClimbsTheMountains.com, that I forced him to do when he was climbing his first mountains, where he writes these blog posts in depth. And we pulled out the lessons and we talked about little questions here and there, but he goes through the nitty gritty about what he was feeling and what he was doing. And there's pictures. And I know a lot of people really enjoy this website, so I'll link that in the show notes. And yeah, so I hope you guys really love this episode. Give it a review and leave us a comment and let us know if you did. Share it on social media so that we can see what parts you guys loved. And thank you so much for joining me and my dad today on this episode of the Living Fully podcast. Tune in next Tuesday for more.